I recently bought the Star Wars prequel trilogy on 4K Blu-ray, so I stayed up late and watched all 3 in a row. It was a pretty fucking wild night. There was a time when I would stick these movies on every couple of weeks, but it's been a while since I watched them, and never in this beautifully upscaled format. So I thought I'd do a video for each one as a kind of retrospective review, see how they hold up. Starting, of course, with The Phantom Menace, one of the highest grossing and most polarizing films ever made.
A bigger fish.
There is an undeniable element of nostalgia clouding my judgment, but I think this is a really good movie. I get why OG fans from the 70s might have soured on the Star Wars prequels when they came out and they were all in their 30s, but the prequels came out when I was like 5 years old. Like the rest of my generation of Star Wars fans, I was completely mesmerized by them. When I was a wee lad at a car boot sale in the early aughts, I found a videotape called Star Wars Episode 1 and I was like, wait, there's an Episode 1 before Episode 4? So I bought that tape, took it straight home, put it on, and The Phantom Menace blew my tiny mind. Watching it back now in glorious 4K, ravaged by 20 years of life experience, I can tell it's far from a perfect movie. But it is at the very least a great story. Like all the best prequels, The Phantom Menace uses the inevitability of fate as a dramatic tool. We know where all these characters are going to end up. We know that this flourishing democracy will soon be a war-torn wasteland ruled by an unstoppable dictator. Introducing Anakin as this adorable, bright-eyed, innocent little boy was an ingenious plot move, because no matter what, we know this kid is destined to become Darth Vader. It sets up the tragedy beautifully. The cutesier Anakin gets, the more heartbreaking his inevitable fall to the dark side will be. I think Jake Lloyd gives a fantastic performance as this version of Anakin, the wayward, kind-hearted kid he was before the rage and resentment took over. CGI hadn't been perfected yet, so George Lucas wasn't able to fill every single frame with CGI like he would go on to do with the other prequels. That's not to say it's used sparingly, but there are some great practical effects. The Phantom Menace has the most miniatures of any Star Wars film. Yoda was actually created with the usual puppet effects in the original version of Phantom Menace. But you know, Lucas being Lucas, he's since gone back in and took out the puppet Yoda and replaced him with CGI, but whatever, that's not as egregious as what he did to Mos Eisley Spaceport. Whatever you think of Anakin in this movie, The Phantom Menace has an undeniably great introduction for R2-D2 that ties in perfectly with the droids being the one constant throughout the saga. R2 is introduced as just another maintenance droid sent out to almost certain doom to work on the failing engine of Padme's royal starship. It's only by sheer luck of the draw that he's not shot into oblivion. I'm less warm on C-3PO's introduction. He didn't need an origin story, especially one as forced as being created by Anakin. It's nice to see his first meeting with R2, but it's nothing special. I would have been fine to not see how they met and just introduce them as best friends who've been working together for years. If you set it up as a significant chapter in R2 and 3PO's lives, it takes away from the irony of all the human conflicts being a tiny footnote in the lives of these two droids. There's a fun dynamic between Qui-Gon and Padme when Padme disguises as a handmaiden to accompany him into town, and the whole time he's slagging off the Queen without realizing he's talking to the Queen.
You Jedi are far too reckless. The Queen is not.
The Queen trusts my judgment, young handmaiden. You should too.
But the movie doesn't set up that bit as well as it could. The whole Queen decoy situation is pretty fuzzy right up until Padme's big speech when she finally reveals herself to be the Queen. The pod racing sequence is one of the best set pieces in the whole Star Wars franchise. It's a little underdog sports movie wedged into the middle of this intergalactic action epic. Early on, the sequence establishes its stakes. Anakin has to do 3 circuits of the most dangerous racetrack on Tatooine. And not only does he have to win the race to earn his freedom from slavery, he has to survive just to earn the luxury of not being dead. The pod race immediately sets up Anakin as the underdog, when his engine fails at the starting line and all the other racers get a head start before he can actually even join the race. Lucas gives Anakin a rival who's easy to root against in Sebulba the sadistic saboteur. Unusually for a Star Wars action scene, there's no John Williams music for most of the pod race. Instead, the roar of Ben Burtt's pod racer engines creates a kind of rhythm of its own that makes you feel like you're actually sitting in one of these pods going 500 miles an hour. The music doesn't kick in until the very end, when Anakin is neck and neck with Sebulba, and it adds to the tension beautifully. This sequence also works as a fun death race style satire of autosports. Pod racing is a spectator sport in a universe with no regard for human life, or alien life. It's a much more high stakes version of NASCAR, where half the racers die in a fiery crash and the rest are shot at from the sidelines. It's a really phenomenal sequence that never gets old. Darth Maul is an incredible villain. He's like Tom Hardy's Bane, forced to follow up one of the greatest villains ever put on screen. Being the next villain in a Star Wars movie after Vader is like being the next comedian on stage after Eddie Murphy. It's a very daunting task. But Maul manages to be just as badass, just as intimidating, and just as outright terrifying as Vader without copying any of his hallmarks. Kylo Ren. Maul looks like the devil, he has the formidable fighting skills to back up his ominous glare, and he has a double-bladed freaking lightsaber. The Phantom Menace builds to another Return of the Jedi style cross-cutting finale, switching between a few different perspectives of the same battle. The problem with this one is that once Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon's duel of the fates with Maul has been set up, you're just waiting for Lucas to cut back to that. Jar Jar accidentally kicking battle droid arse and Anakin accidentally blowing up the Trade Federation mothership are nowhere near as tense and exhilarating as the fight against Maul. Padme and her guards reclaiming their palace is a pretty awesome sequence with some fun spy gadgets, but it still doesn't hold a candle to the Duel of the Fates. This duel has something that a lot of recent Star Wars action doesn't have: consequences. Obi-Wan defeats Maul and Anakin can start his training, but Qui-Gon is killed in the process. Anakin is robbed of the perfect father figure and driven right into the arms of the worst one imaginable.
We will watch your career with great interest.
The Duel of the Fates is one of the greatest lightsaber duels in all of Star Wars. It's not just crucial to the entire overarching narrative of the saga, it's also staged and shot and choreographed spectacularly. It builds to the perfect conclusion. Obi-Wan uses his master's own weapon to bisect his killer. That's what people are talking about when they say this shit is Shakespearean. Overall, I can see why some people hate The Phantom Menace. But I can't not love this movie, and it's nowhere near as bad as its reputation would suggest. At its absolute worst, it's a fun, family-friendly space adventure, and at its best, it's a wildly subversive origin story for one of the most iconic villains ever created. Yes, it turns Darth Vader into an aw shucks little pod racer, but doesn't it add to the tragedy that Vader was once this sweet, innocent little boy?
It's working! It's working!
Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you liked the video. Remember to like and subscribe and click on the little bell. And also seize the day and call your mom and be kind to yourself.